Do you ever feel like you're being pulled thin in 100 different directions, drowned in the relentless noise of a world that demands our attention every second, yet somehow leaves us feeling emptier and more lost than ever? In the rush of life, we long for something solid, an anchor for the soul, a sense of true peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. Now, picture a different image. A person still living in this very chaotic world, facing the same pressures and uncertainties, but whose mind is completely calm. They move with a steady purpose, a deep composure, unshaken by momentary emotional waves or outside judgment. They possess something we all quietly admire, the foundation of a meaningful life, a strong character. This isn't a gift randomly bestowed at birth. This kind of steadfast inner strength isn't a privilege reserved for a lucky few. It's the predictable result of disciplined, intentional practice. It is a craft forged in the fire of self-discipline, sharpened by the courage to step into self-transformation, and safeguarded by a subtle, often misunderstood art. The art of letting go, of detachment. It isn't about becoming numb. It's about becoming free from within. So, how do we build that foundation? How do we stop drifting passively and start actively sculpting the person we want to become? Where does that journey begin? The journey we're about to embark on is not a quick fix or a secret formula. It's a deep exploration of 3 foundational pillars, 3 ancient arts that shape a resilient character. Today, we won't focus on just one, but on the powerful convergence of all 3: self-discipline, self-transformation, and the art of letting go. This is the essence of what we've been talking about. A strong character isn't merely about having iron will. It's a complex inner ecosystem. Self-discipline is the core skill. We often mistake it by waiting for motivation to arrive like a savior, but motivation is inherently fickle and changeable. Discipline, by contrast, is a trainable skill. It's the ability to show up and take action, even when we don't feel like it, so we can live according to our values and goals, instead of being dragged around by passing emotions. But discipline without direction is just blind asceticism. That's where self-transformation comes in. This is the courageous process of looking inward, questioning beliefs, habits, and even outdated identities that no longer serve our growth. It's intentionally shedding old skin to create space for a more flexible mindset, an inner freedom to move beyond the limits we once imposed on ourselves. And finally, to protect that progress, we need the art of letting go, or detachment. This is perhaps the most misunderstood concept. It is not indifference or numbness. It's the capacity to separate your core values from external outcomes and other people's opinions. It's the ability to care deeply and give your best without clinging to results. It allows us to remain peaceful through ups and downs, to be fully present without being controlled by outcomes. Why is the combination of these 3 elements so pertinent in the modern world? Because we live in an age of extreme distraction and widespread exhaustion. We're obsessed with instant results and external validation, and we fall into loops of procrastination. In this video, we'll examine each of these core principles in depth. We'll explore the psychology behind willpower and self-control, see how great philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and thinkers like Nietzsche defined discipline. We'll learn how to build sustainable habits and routines, and most importantly, we'll identify how you can start applying this wisdom today to cultivate a growth mindset and discover true peace along your journey. These ideas, discipline, self-transformation, and letting go, are not inventions of our age. They are powerful underground currents flowing through the history of human thought. The answers of the greatest minds to the timeless question, how do we live a good life in a world full of chaos and suffering? To truly grasp their weight, we have to look back to the source. The philosophical foundations for self-discipline and detachment were perhaps most powerfully distilled by the Roman Stoics. Imagine their context. An empire constantly shaken by political upheaval, unending wars and rampant plagues. In the midst of that turbulence, figures like Seneca, a statesman navigating deadly intrigues, and especially Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who wrote the immortal Meditations on the front lines, did not try to change the external world, a nearly impossible task. Instead, they focused on the only fortress they could control, their own minds. They forged inner discipline not to conquer the world, but to conquer themselves and find tranquility. In parallel, in the East, philosophies like Buddhism and Taoism, with the teachings of Laozi, Lao Tzu, explored the art of letting go in profound depth, non-craving, non-clinging, and acting in harmony with nature, to reduce unnecessary friction with life. But what about the third pillar, self-transformation? Its roots lead us into the realm of depth psychology. In the early 20th century, as the world wrestled with the dizzying changes of the industrial age, thinkers like Carl Jung began a journey inward, mapping the territory of the human unconscious. Jung showed us that real transformation isn't about putting on new masks, but about a courageous process he called individuation, the journey toward wholeness by facing and integrating the darkest parts of ourselves, what he called the shadow. And perhaps no one embodied the intersection of all three pillars more powerfully than Viktor Frankl. A psychologist who survived the Holocaust, Frankl witnessed human beings stripped of everything. In the absolute depths of despair, he discovered a shattering truth. Even when everything external is lost, we still retain one final freedom, the freedom to choose our attitude. His logotherapy was born from that very experience, proving that the greatest discipline is to find a meaning worth living for. What we will explore today is not abstract theory. These are maps drawn from lived experience, forged in adversity, and distilled by those who walked the path before us. Let's begin with the foundational pillar, the concept that's often misunderstood yet the most important. Self-discipline. In modern culture, we're obsessed with motivation. We watch inspirational videos, listen to powerful speeches, and wait for a surge, a blazing impulse to finally change. But that's the biggest trap. Motivation, by its very nature, is a fickle guest. It's a feeling, and like all feelings, it comes and goes. It's the reason to start. But what happens on a gray Tuesday morning when it's raining, you're tired, and yesterday's spark of inspiration is nothing but ashes? In those moments, relying on motivation equals procrastination. This is where self-discipline steps in, not as a feeling, but as a skill. Discipline is the way to keep going. It's the conscious choice to show up even when you don't feel like it. It's your personal commitment, a promise that you will act according to your long-term values and goals, rather than be pulled around by momentary comfort or present-moment distractions. The person who masters discipline acts regardless of how they feel. We often confuse discipline with punishment, or a blind form of asceticism. We imagine it as a prison of rigid rules that strips away all joy. But the truth is the exact opposite. When rightly understood, discipline is the only path to true freedom. It isn't a chain, it's a key. It's freedom from your own impulsivity. It's freedom from being a slave to bad habits, instant gratifications, and chaotic emotions. Discipline is the ability to steer the course of your life, to actively weave long-term progress instead of drifting passively with circumstance. To see more clearly, look at its psychological foundation. Discipline is closely tied to willpower and self-control. Think of willpower like a muscle. It can be trained to grow stronger through regular use, but it also has limits and can fatigue. You can't simply try harder at everything. That's why smart discipline isn't constant straining. It's the building of habits and routines. Discipline is the initial effort required to carve a good behavior into your brain. Habit is the automation of that behavior. Once an action becomes a habit, it costs almost no willpower. A well-designed routine reduces the burden of decision-making and frees your mental energy for what truly matters. And the philosophical foundation of discipline goes even deeper. For Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius, discipline is a moral imperative. He didn't ask whether he felt like fulfilling the duties of an emperor. He did it because it was his duty, because it was right. He practiced discipline toward the only thing he could truly control, his own responses and choices. As he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Friedrich Nietzsche also saw the transformative power of discipline, but through a different lens. For him, it was an expression of the will to power, not power over others, but the surpassing of oneself, absolute self-mastery over the ego. Discipline is the tool by which a person sculpts themselves from a rough block of stone into a work of art. And Nietzsche gave us one of the deepest reflections on the link between purpose and discipline. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. When you have a large enough why, a purpose, a meaning, discipline becomes the how you're willing to endure. It becomes the lantern that guides you through distraction and stagnation. Even Aristotle defined eudaimonia, human flourishing, not as a state, but as the result of consistently practicing virtue. Discipline is the deliberate repetition of those virtue-oriented habits. So, in the modern context, we can synthesize. Discipline isn't the blind pursuit of goals. As James Clear points out, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Discipline is the art of building a system, a structure, a set of habits, a mindset, to support the person you want to become. It's a commitment to the process, to the small, steady efforts made every day. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But how do we translate this profound theory into action? What does discipline actually look like when it meets the real challenges of everyday life? Let's start with the foundational pillar, the concept that's often misunderstood, yet the most important: self-discipline. In modern culture, we're obsessed with motivation. We watch inspirational videos, listen to powerful speeches, and wait for an explosive feeling, a strong urge to begin changing. But that's the biggest trap. Motivation, by nature, is a fickle guest. It's an emotion, and like all emotions, it comes and goes. It's the reason to start. But what happens on a gloomy Tuesday morning when it's raining, you're tired, and yesterday's spark of inspiration is just ashes? In that moment, relying on motivation equals procrastination. This is where self-discipline steps in, not as an emotion, but as a skill. Discipline is the way to keep going. It is the conscious choice to show up even when you don't feel like it. It's your commitment to yourself, a commitment that you will act based on your long-term values and goals, rather than be dragged around by momentary comfort or present distractions. The person who masters discipline acts in spite of their feelings. We often mistake discipline for punishment, or a blind form of asceticism. We picture it as a prison of rigid rules that strips away all joy. But the truth is the exact opposite. When rightly understood, discipline is the only path to true freedom. It isn't a chain, it's a key. It's freedom from your own impulsivity. It's freedom from becoming a slave to bad habits, instant cravings, and chaotic emotions. Discipline is the ability to steer the direction of your life, to actively weave long-term progress instead of passively drifting with circumstance. To understand it more clearly, look at its psychological foundation. Discipline is closely tied to willpower and self-control, I Chi and Tu Chu. Think of willpower as a muscle. It can be trained to grow stronger through regular use, but it also has limits and can get fatigued. You can't just try harder at everything. That's why smart discipline isn't about constant straining. It's about building habits and routines. Discipline is the initial effort needed to carve a good behavior into the brain. Habit is the automation of that behavior. When an action becomes a habit, it hardly consumes willpower anymore. A well-designed routine reduces the burden of decision-making and frees up your mental energy for more important tasks. And the philosophical foundation of discipline runs even deeper. For Stoics like Marcus Aurelius, discipline is a moral imperative. He didn't ask whether he felt like performing the duties of an emperor. He did it because it was his duty, because it was right. He practiced discipline toward the only thing he could truly control, his own reactions and choices. As he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Friedrich Nietzsche also saw the transformative power in discipline, but through a different lens. For him, it was an expression of the will to power, not power over others, but the surpassing of oneself, absolute self-mastery over the ego. Discipline is the tool by which a person sculpts themselves from a rough block of stone into a work of art. And Nietzsche gave us one of the most profound quotes about the link between purpose and discipline. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. When you have a large enough why, a purpose, a meaning, discipline becomes the how you're willing to endure. It becomes the guiding light that leads you through distraction and stagnation. Even Aristotle defined eudaimonia, or human flourishing, not as a state but as the result of consistently practicing virtue. Discipline is the deliberate repetition of those virtue-oriented habits. So, in the modern context, we can synthesize. Discipline isn't the blind pursuit of goals. As James Clear points out, you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Discipline is the art of building a system, a structure, a set of habits, a mindset, to support the person you want to become. It's a commitment to the process, to the small, steady efforts made every day. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So, what does the shift from relying on motivation to training self-discipline actually look like in practice? It isn't a grand declaration. It's a series of small, quiet choices made every day. Consider the situation of a creator, a writer, an artist, a programmer, trying to finish an important project. On day one, they're filled with inspiration. Ideas pour out, and they work for hours in a flow. That's motivation. But by day three, the excitement has faded. They sit before a blank screen, and suddenly, every tiny distraction becomes appealing. An email notification, the thought of making coffee, the urge to check social media. This is overcoming procrastination in its most essential form. Motivation tells them, wait until you feel ready, don't force creativity. But discipline whispers something else. Discipline says, set a timer for 25 minutes, just 25. This is the essence of the Pomodoro technique, a system of discipline. That creator isn't committing to writing a masterpiece in those 25 minutes. They're only committing to show up and focus. Often, that simple act of starting breaks the inertia and brings them back into the work stream. They win, not by inspiration, but by system. Or think about the commitment to improve physical health. You set a SMART goal. Run for 30 minutes, 3 times a week. Motivation is high when you buy the new shoes. But at 6 a.m. on Thursday, the alarm goes off. Outside, it's cold and dark, and the bed is warm. The real battle of will is happening now. The person who relies on motivation will hit snooze. The person who trains discipline will rely on their habits and routines. They may not want to run, but they've automated the behavior. They don't think about the entire 30-minute run. Their discipline is simply, my job is to sit up and put on my shoes. They've minimized friction. They've turned willpower from a muscle that must strain every time into a familiar footpath. Discipline, here, is sticking to the schedule, regardless of the feeling in the moment. And perhaps the subtlest example of discipline is in the inner world, managing distraction. We live in an attention economy where the mind is constantly pulled by digital noise. Discipline here isn't forcing the mind to be silent. It's the practice of mindfulness. It's the gentle discipline of noticing your mind wandering and, without judgment, bringing it back to the present. Each time you do that, you're doing a rep for your focus muscle. Most importantly, discipline is not perfection. There will be days you fail. You'll hit snooze. You'll waste hours on social media. This is where the difference between discipline and self-punishment becomes clear. A rigid mindset will see this as proof that I'm a failure. But a growth mindset, nourished by discipline, treats failure as data. It uses self-awareness and self-compassion to ask, why did that happen? Where did my system break? Is my environment too distracting? Do I need recovery? Discipline, then, is not a single heroic act, but thousands of small, consistent choices compounded over time. It's the art of building a structure for your life, a structure that supports the person you aspire to be, even on your weakest days. It lays the solid foundation. But what happens when the person standing on that foundation, our beliefs and our identity, is exactly what's holding us back? Building habits is one thing, But changing the person who performs those habits is an entirely different revolution. We've established self-discipline as the system, the path, and the structure that allows us to move forward. But this raises a deeper question. What happens if the very person walking that path, the identity, beliefs, and worldview we hold, is our biggest obstacle? You can have a perfect system, but if the person operating it is constrained by self-imposed limits, progress will always be capped. This is where we step into the second pillar, a deep, often frightening inner journey. Self-transformation. If discipline is doing, then self-transformation is becoming. It isn't simply learning a new skill or changing a surface habit. It's a revolution from within. It's the courageous process of turning inward, lifting the stones we've spent a lifetime hiding beneath and daring to change at the root. It's the willingness to shed layers of beliefs, habits, and even outdated identities that no longer serve our growth. It's actively rewriting your life, instead of merely reading the script you were handed. To understand this process, we need to borrow maps from the greatest explorers of the human mind. First, we must face the work of Carl Jung. For Jung, the aim of life isn't perfection, it's wholeness. This is the process of becoming a unified, unfragmented individual. And the only path to wholeness, according to Jung, is through the most courageous act: shadow work. The shadow is everything in ourselves that we deny, repress, or feel ashamed of. Anger, fear, envy, selfishness. The more we try to bury it, the more power it holds over us, quietly steering our behavior from the unconscious. Self-transformation, in Jung's terms, is the decision to stop running. It's turning back to face and integrate that shadow. It's acknowledging it, understanding it, and unlocking the power and creativity trapped inside it. Next, we meet Friedrich Nietzsche and the idea of self-overcoming. Nietzsche saw life as a relentless struggle to affirm one's will, with the greatest opponent being the present version of ourselves. Transformation is not a comfortable journey. It's forged in adversity. He declared, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." Nietzsche challenges us to see pain and difficulty not as signs to stop, but as the necessary catalysts for growth. Self-transformation is an act of value creation, of forging sovereignty over one's life. It's the deliberate reframing of suffering, using it as fuel to become stronger and deeper. And if Nietzsche and Jung provide the engine, then Jean-Paul Sartre and the existentialists give us responsibility. Sartre said we are condemned to be free. This means we cannot escape the truth that in every moment we are choosing who we become. Self-transformation is not a luxury. It's the inescapable fate of being human. The greatest danger, according to Sartre, is bad faith. Self-deception, in which we blame circumstances, the past, or other people for our condition. To live authentically is to take full responsibility for our choices. Self-transformation, therefore, is the supreme act of authenticity, accepting our freedom and courageously choosing a new self. But how do we know what to transform into? Viktor Frankl answered this from the depths of a concentration camp. Through logotherapy, Frankl showed that the deepest human drive is finding meaning. Self-transformation is oriented by meaning. Even in the face of unavoidable suffering, we still retain the freedom to choose our attitude. Transformation happens when we stop asking, "What do I want from life?" and start asking, "What does life want from me?" We find meaning, and with it, a compass for transformation, through the work we create, the love we give, and the courage with which we face suffering. Finally, William James brings all this down to earth with his pragmatism. He argued that beliefs create realities. Your beliefs don't merely describe the world, they produce it. If you believe, "I'm the kind of person who procrastinates," you will act accordingly. Self-transformation, therefore, must begin by examining and challenging your limiting beliefs and replacing them with empowering ones. This is the core of a growth mindset, the fundamental belief that abilities and intelligence can be developed through effort, strategies, and feedback. So, self-transformation is not a mystical event. It's the intentional, sometimes painful process of integrating the shadow, overcoming oneself through adversity, accepting existential responsibility, pursuing meaning, and changing your core beliefs. It is the building of a flexible mindset, an inner freedom real enough to move beyond limits you once thought were permanent. The theory of self-transformation is compelling, but it's often shrouded in the fog of abstraction. So what does this inner revolution actually look like in everyday life, amid work, responsibilities, and relationships? Let's start with a common situation. Failure at work. Imagine someone who has just delivered a disastrous presentation. The initial reaction, the bad faith response Sartre warned about, is an immediate defense mechanism. I failed because the audience wasn't paying attention. Or, my boss didn't give me enough time. Or, more dangerously, I'm just not a good speaker. This is the evasion of existential responsibility, blaming circumstances, or pinning oneself to a fixed identity. But someone beginning the transformation journey experiences a different moment. They may feel all the anger and shame, but then they pause. They practice self-awareness. They ask a courageous question. What part of this is my responsibility? This is where William James's theory comes alive. They realize the belief, "I'm just not a good speaker," isn't a permanent truth. It's a limiting belief, and that belief is creating their reality. Transformation begins when they actively challenge that belief and replace it with an empowering one, the core of a growth mindset. I may not be good yet, but I can get better through effort and the right strategy. Failure is no longer a death sentence for their identity. It becomes data for learning. They're not just changing habits, they're changing the self who believes in those habits. Now, let's go deeper into a more complex example. Carl Jung's shadow work. Consider someone who identifies as a good person, a chronic people pleaser. They avoid conflict at all costs, always saying yes, even when something inside is screaming no. On the surface, they seem agreeable. Inside, they feel drained, resentful, and often express anger passively. Their shadow is assertiveness, the repressed anger, the ability to say no. Their transformation isn't about trying to become nicer. It is about turning back to face the bad part they've denied. They might begin by journaling emotions, asking, "What am I really feeling right now beneath this smile?" They might practice inner dialogue, asking their shadow, "What are you trying to protect me from?" Gradually, they learn to integrate that shadow. Transformation doesn't turn them into a cruel person. It turns them into a whole person. Next time, instead of saying yes through gritted teeth, they can calmly say, "I understand your request, but I can't do that right now." They've moved from a fragmented, reactive self to a unified, deliberate self. Finally, consider the highest illustration of self-transformation, the one Viktor Frankl and Nietzsche spoke of, facing unavoidable suffering. Imagine someone confronting a major loss or a life-threatening illness. They cannot change that fact. No amount of discipline can reverse the circumstance. One person may be crushed by adversity, falling into despair and bitterness. Another, through self-transformation, discovers the final human freedom, the freedom to choose one's attitude. They don't pretend they aren't in pain. Instead, they reframe the meaning of suffering. They ask, "What is life demanding of me right now?" Perhaps the meaning is found in becoming a source of strength for those around them. Perhaps it's found in cherishing each small moment that remains. They use adversity as a forge to temper a deeper, more resilient version of themselves. Across all three examples, transformation isn't about adding something new. It's about the courage to dig deep and integrate what's already there. It is a process that demands we face the vulnerable, fearful, hidden parts of ourselves. And this leads to an inevitable question. If we train discipline and courageously transform, how do we handle the outcomes? How do we protect our inner peace, no matter whether the journey brings success or failure? We've built two pillars. We have self-discipline as the system and engine that lets us move forward. And we have self-transformation as the compass that courageously redefines the one who's walking. But this journey doesn't unfold in a vacuum. It unfolds in a chaotic world, a world of uncertain outcomes, other people's expectations, and unpredictable highs and lows. This leads us to the third pillar, perhaps the fortress wall that protects our inner peace. Detachment, the art of letting go. Right away, we need to shatter a common misconception. When we hear letting go, our minds jump to images of indifference, numbness, a cold heart that's stopped caring. But that is a harmful distortion. Detachment is not caring. On the contrary, it's the deepest and most sustainable form of caring. As our outline made clear, this is letting go without indifference. So what is it really? Detachment is a conscious act of separating your core values, your sense of who you are, from external outcomes and other people's opinions. It's the capacity to give your best, to invest your whole heart and mind in a task, a relationship, or a goal, while at the same time refusing to cling to any single predetermined outcome. It's the ability to be fully present in the journey without being controlled by the final result. This is a radical redefinition of caring. We often believe that the degree of our suffering over an outcome is proportional to how much we care about it. If we don't agonize when we fail, it must mean we didn't try hard enough. Detachment challenges that belief. It doesn't promote apathy. It promotes the wise allocation of our finite emotional resources. It's the care less, achieve more strategy, caring less about the ephemeral, approval, instant results, judgment, so we can care more about what's core, effort, dignity, our values. Like the first two pillars, this wisdom has deep roots in both Eastern and Western philosophy. For Stoicism, this is a central principle. Marcus Aurelius and Seneca constantly trained the ability to distinguish what belongs to us from what does not. Effort, choices, judgments, these belong to us. outcomes, health, reputation, other people's actions. These do not. Stoic detachment is the practice of removing the label of judgment. A failure is not a disaster. It is simply an event. It's our clinging to the label disaster that creates suffering. They built an inner citadel that nothing external could breach. In the East, Buddhism goes straight to the root. The cause of suffering is attachment. Non-craving and non-clinging do not mean refusing love or joy, but understanding the impermanence of all things. We suffer not because we lost something, but because we mistakenly believed we owned it forever. Letting go is seeing things as they truly are, allowing us to experience them fully without being destroyed when they change. Taoism, through Laozi, offers another angle with Wu Wei. It is action in accordance with nature, without forcing. Clinging is an act full of friction, an attempt to bend reality to our will. Detachment is reducing that friction with life, learning to glide with the current instead of exhausting ourselves, swimming upstream. And, surprisingly, modern psychology has caught up with this ancient wisdom through attachment theory. The way we bonded with caregivers in childhood, secure, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, profoundly shapes how we relate to the world and handle stress as adults. Someone with an anxious style may cling desperately to relationships or work outcomes, treating them as the only source of self-worth. Therefore, healthy detachment in psychology is not avoidance. It's built on a secure attachment to oneself. It's the capacity to set clear boundaries. It's the ability to participate with compassion, to love deeply, to work hard, without dissolving yourself into the object of that love or work. You know where you end and where the outcome begins. You will be okay, no matter what happens. In short, detachment is the ultimate art of balance. It's the synthesis of Stoic realism, Buddhist acceptance of impermanence, Taoist natural flow, and the inner safety of modern psychology. It is the shield that lets us separate ourselves from what lies beyond our control, so we can act with clarity, effectiveness, and above all, inner peace. But how do we practice this? How do we care deeply without clinging in real emotionally charged situations? The theory of detachment is beautiful, but it faces a harsh test: reality. How do we apply it when adrenaline is surging, when our heart is breaking, or when the career we've painstakingly built is on the brink of collapse? Consider a common scenario: a high-stakes presentation. You've spent months on this project. You believe in it with all your heart. What does clinging look like? It's when you walk into that room and your entire sense of self gets completely dissolved into the outcome. If they nod, you're a genius. If they shake their heads, you're a failure. As you present, you're not trying to convey value. You're desperately seeking approval. You tremble, you get defensive at questions, and your anxiety fills the room. You've handed all your power to the people on the other side of the table. Now, imagine the same scenario, but with healthy detachment. You still prepared for months. You still believe in the project. You still care deeply, but you've practiced the Stoic principle. You've drawn a clear boundary. My effort, my preparation, my clarity of speech, those belong to me. Their final decision, their mood that day, their company's budget, those do not belong to me. You walk in, not with arrogance, but with calm. You present passionately, but not desperately. You answer questions with openness, treating them as data rather than attacks. You are present without being controlled by the outcome. If you fail, you'll feel disappointed. You're not a robot, but you won't be destroyed. Your worth remains intact because you've invested your capital in inner growth rather than in external judgment. Take another example, an even harder one: personal relationships. Imagine you're trying to help a loved one who is self-destructing. Clinging here is an emotional trap. You believe it's your responsibility to save them. Their happiness becomes your happiness. Their pain becomes your pain. You've crossed the point of emotional depletion. You grow resentful, exhausted, and you lose yourself in their chaos. This is attachment turned toxic. Detachment here is not abandoning them. It's the ultimate act of self-care so that you can continue to care. It's participating with compassion while holding firm boundaries. You can say, "I love you deeply, and I will support your recovery journey, but I will not allow your behavior to destroy me." You separate yourself from the illusion that you can control another person's actions. You accept the painful truth that you cannot want something for someone more than they want it for themselves. This is the delicate balance between compassion and self-preservation. And if you need a historical mirror, look to Marcus Aurelius. He was the most powerful man in the world, yet he wrote Meditations not in a peaceful palace, but at the front, amid war and plague. He constantly faced betrayal, foolishness, and death. His journal is a real-time practice of detachment. He kept reminding himself to remove the label of judgment, to accept reality. It is what it is. And to focus on one thing, his own virtuous response. He trained his inner citadel every day, not to become numb, but to continue leading steadily in the midst of chaos. Thus, letting go is not a passive act. It's an active discipline that protects your sanity. It enables you to act more effectively, love more deeply, and live more resiliently. These three pillars, discipline, self-transformation, and detachment, are grand pillars indeed. But we don't live our lives in three separate compartments. How do we combine them? How do we weave them into a unified tapestry of practice for the busy, complex, distraction-saturated life of the 21st century? We've traveled a deep philosophical and psychological journey, exploring three pillars: self-discipline as a system, self-transformation as an inner revolution, and detachment as a fortress protecting your peace. Now, the most important question emerges. So how can we combine these principles in the busy, distraction-saturated, high-pressure life of the 21st century? This is the true take-home section. We're done with theory. We're going to build a living practice framework. This isn't about adding more burdens to an already overloaded schedule. It's a new way to navigate that schedule itself. The key lies in daily micro-adjustments. Micro-adjusting your systems, discipline. Micro-adjusting your beliefs, transformation. And micro-adjusting your emotional boundaries, detachment. We'll divide this practice framework into three levels: action systems, inner work, and the art of balance. 1. Action systems, practicing discipline. Practical discipline isn't iron will. It's smart design. As James Clear said, we fall to the level of our systems. So build a better system. Start with why. Before setting any SMART goals, answer Nietzsche's and Viktor Frankl's question. What is your why for living? What is your purpose? What are your core values? Discipline without meaning leads to burnout. Write down 3 to 5 core values. Every habit you build must serve these values. Design habits and routines. Willpower is a limited resource. Don't waste it on small decisions. Automate good behavior. Design a morning or evening routine. It doesn't need to be complex, but it must be consistent. This helps reduce decision load and preserves mental energy for what matters. Manage the environment, not just yourself. Discipline is much easier when you're not fighting your environment. Optimize for focus. If you want to overcome procrastination, make distractions harder. Block digital noise with apps. Put your phone in another room. Use time-framing tools. Don't just work, work deliberately. The Pomodoro technique, 25 minutes of focused work, 5 minutes of rest, is a micro-discipline drill. It trains focus and provides immediate progress rewards, countering overwhelm. Fuel, physical willpower. Willpower isn't only mental, it's physiological. You can't have self-control if you're depleted. Sleep, light, eat/move aren't luxuries. They are the non-negotiable foundation of discipline. 2. Inner work. Practicing self-transformation. Your external system will collapse if your internal operating system is outdated. Practice radical self-awareness. This is the starting line. Begin an emotions journal or reflection log. At the end of each day, ask deep reflective questions. What triggered me today? When did I feel most authentic? When did I fall into bad faith and blame circumstances? Challenge limiting beliefs. Use your journal to spot limiting beliefs. When you fail, listen to the story you tell yourself. If the story is, "I'm a failure," stop. That's a fixed belief. Actively challenge and replace it with an empowering belief, a growth mindset. This strategy failed, not me. What can I learn from this data? Dialogue with the shadow. Carl Jung. When you feel a strong negative emotion, like envy or intense anger, that you usually suppress, try this exercise. Instead of pushing it down, write it out. Give it a name. Dialogue with it. Ask, what are you trying to protect me from? What are you afraid of? This is how you begin integrating the shadow instead of being unconsciously controlled by it. Reframe the meaning of suffering. When facing unavoidable adversity, practice meaning reframing. Don't ask, why is this happening to me? Ask Frankl's question. What attitude is life asking of me right now? See adversity as a catalyst to train endurance and deepen character. 3. The art of balance. Practicing detachment. This is the adhesive that keeps discipline from turning toxic and transformation from turning chaotic. Set emotional boundaries. Detachment in practice is boundaries. Identify your emotional depletion points. Which people, situations, or topics are they? Practice saying no firmly yet kindly. Renegotiate expectations at work and in relationships. This is the essential act of self-care to prevent burnout. Mindfulness of impermanence. Detachment isn't numbness, it's acceptance of impermanence. Spend 5 minutes each morning doing nothing. Just observe. Notice a thought arise and fade. Notice a feeling swell and settle. You're training the muscle of non-clinging. You're learning to experience an emotion without becoming that emotion. Shift from outcome to process. This is the synthesis of all three pillars. Your discipline sets up the system. Your transformation cultivates a growth mindset. Your detachment lets you love the process. You still set goals, but you separate your self-worth from achieving them. Your satisfaction comes from running the system each day. When you combine them, you get a powerful toolkit. When you face procrastination driven by fear of failure or perfectionism, you'll use discipline. Break the task down and use Pomodoro. Transformation. Practice self-compassion and challenge the belief that I must be perfect. Detachment. Focus on effort, not outcome. When you recognize the signs of burnout, exhaustion, cynicism, reduced performance, you'll use detachment. Rest and recover and set boundaries. Say no. Transformation. Realign your values. Does this work still fit my why? Discipline. Shrink the goals to regain momentum. This is not a one-and-done job. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Every day is a chance to micro-adjust. Don't try to do everything at once. Start small. Choose one action. Maybe it's 5 minutes of journaling. Maybe it's one Pomodoro. Maybe it's simply one deliberate deep breath to practice mindfulness. This is how you begin building a life that is not only successful, but also meaningful, courageous, and serene. Of course, this path isn't obstacle-free. Applying these philosophies, especially in a society that glorifies busyness and instant results, will run into very real challenges. Of course, sketching a unified practice is one thing. Walking that path is something else entirely. It would be incomplete not to acknowledge the real difficulties and challenges. Applying these three pillars isn't always easy, and they're not a cure-all. A common criticism, especially of detachment, is that it can lead to apathy, coldness, or a subtle form of avoidance. Is letting go just a polished way of refusing genuine connection, or dodging the necessary pain that comes with caring? Could it make us indifferent to real injustice, waving everything away as outside my control? And self-discipline, when pushed to extremes, can mutate into toxic perfectionism, or a harsh self-punishment that leads straight to burnout, exhaustion of both mind and body. Furthermore, are these philosophies truly suitable for everyone, especially for those wrestling with systemic hardships or deep psychological wounds? It's easy to talk about shadow work or accepting existential responsibility when your basic needs are met. But for someone facing daily instability, such advice can feel hollow or even cruel. These are valid counter-arguments. They remind us that these tools must be used with wisdom, self-compassion, and contextual awareness. Healthy detachment is not avoidance. It's boundary protection. Effective discipline must be balanced with restoration. And self-transformation cannot unfold without a basic foundation of safety. Recognizing these challenges doesn't diminish the value of the principles. On the contrary, it makes them more realistic. It invites us to apply them not as rigid dogmas, but as flexible tools, calibrated to the complex realities of each of our lives. Through this deep exploration, we've seen that a strong character isn't something we're granted. It's something we patiently build. It isn't an unchanging block of stone, but a garden that must be tended with 3 great tools. We've seen the foundational power of self-discipline, not as punishment, but as the intelligent art of building systems and habits that support the person we want to become. We've stepped into the courage of self-transformation, an inner journey to face shadow work, challenge limiting beliefs, and actively choose our identity instead of letting circumstances decide it for us. And we've learned the protective wisdom of detachment, the subtle art of separating our self-worth from external outcomes, allowing us to care deeply without burning out, to act decisively while preserving our inner peace. Ultimately, these 3 pillars, discipline, self-transformation, and detachment, are not 3 separate paths. They are a unified whole, a dynamic dance. This is the art of giving your all without breaking, of changing profoundly without losing your core, and of living fully in a world full of uncertainty. Remember, you don't have to change everything at once. This journey is a marathon, not a sprint. It's a process of small, steady micro-adjustments each day. So where will you begin? Today, which micro-adjustment will you choose first? Your action system, your inner beliefs, or your emotional boundaries? Whatever you choose, begin. Because in the end, as Sartre suggested, life isn't about finding yourself. It's about creating yourself. Start that act of creation. If you found this journey truly valuable and want to continue your path of personal growth, please show your support for the channel. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell now. Don't miss the next in-depth analysis, because your growth is our mission. Follow along and support us. But wait, don't leave just yet. Our journey isn't over. I've prepared the next video. It's appearing right here on the screen. Click it, and we'll take the next step together. Don't stop.